When my parents called a family meeting to discuss their will and the future of our family's auto repair business, I thought they wanted my input on succession planning. After all, I'd been helping manage their books for years while working as a nurse, and I understood both the medical side of Dad's retirement needs and the business implications. What I never expected was to hear my mother look me straight in the eye and say, "Everything goes to Marcus." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The house, the shop, all of it. You're doing fine on your own. But what they didn't know was that I'd been recording our family conversations for months because of Dad's hearing issues. And when I played back what I'd captured, it revealed a conspiracy that had been brewing right under my nose. My name is Janine, and I've spent the last 8 years working as a registered nurse in the cardiac unit at Phoenix General Hospital. When people ask me why I chose nursing, I tell them it's because I've always been the one who takes care of everyone else. Growing up in Scottsdale, Arizona, I was the daughter who reminded Mom about Dad's doctor appointments, who helped my younger brother Marcus with his homework even when he didn't want it, and who started balancing my parents' business checkbook when I was 16 because they were too overwhelmed to keep track of the auto repair shop's finances. My father, Robert, built Desert Oasis Auto from nothing back in 1987. What started as a one-bay garage in a strip mall grew into a thriving business with 12 employees and a reputation for honest work in a city where people depend on their cars to survive the desert heat. Dad always said the shop would stay in the family, and growing up, I assumed that meant all of us. Marcus and I would inherit it together, maybe with me handling the business side while he worked on the mechanical aspects he'd always seemed to enjoy. But Marcus had other plans. After barely graduating high school, he announced he was going to be a musician. Not just play music as a hobby, but become a professional guitarist who would tour the country and make it big. Dad supported this dream with the kind of enthusiasm that only a parent can muster, even as Marcus bounced from band to band, each one lasting about 6 months before dissolving due to creative differences or someone not showing up for practice. Mom would defend every failed venture, saying Marcus just needed time to find his sound, to find the right group of musicians who understood his vision. Meanwhile, I put myself through nursing school while working part-time at the shop, answering phones and doing data entry. I'd study medical terminology between oil changes and practice taking blood pressure on Dad during slow afternoons. When I graduated and got my first job at the hospital, Mom cried at my pinning ceremony and Dad told everyone who would listen that his daughter was saving lives. For a while, it felt like they were proud of both their children, each following their own path. That feeling lasted until Marcus turned 26 and was still living in his childhood bedroom, still talking about his big break, still borrowing money for equipment and studio time that never seemed to produce anything concrete. Dad started making comments about how maybe Marcus needed more structure, more responsibility. Mom would counter that creativity can't be forced, that some people just develop at their own pace. I stayed out of these conversations, focusing on my career and my own life. 3 years ago, I moved into a downtown Phoenix apartment, a modest one-bedroom place with a view of the mountains that I could afford on my nurse's salary. I loved the independence, the quiet after 12-hour shifts, the ability to come home to space that was entirely mine. But I never stopped helping my parents. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Every Sunday, I'd drive out to their ranch-style house in Scottsdale for dinner, and afterward, I'd spend an hour going over the shop's books with Dad, helping him understand insurance claims and tracking inventory. It was during one of these Sunday sessions that I first noticed Dad's hearing was getting worse. He'd always worked around loud machinery, and years of impact wrenches and air compressors had taken their toll. He'd ask me to repeat things, or he'd nod along to conversations and respond in ways that made it clear he'd missed half of what was said. Mom was getting frustrated, repeating herself constantly, and I could see the strain it was putting on both of them. That's when I suggested we start recording important family conversations. Dad was missing details about his medications, forgetting what his cardiologist had told him about his blood pressure, and losing track of business decisions we'd discussed the week before. I bought a small digital recorder and started bringing it to Sunday dinners, particularly when we talked about anything related to Dad's health or the business. Mom thought it was a brilliant idea, And Dad was relieved that he wouldn't have to ask us to repeat everything 3 times. The recording habit expanded naturally. When Marcus would call with updates about his music career, or requests for money, I'd often have the recorder running if Dad was part of the conversation, just so we could reference what was discussed later. When we talked about family plans or made decisions about home repairs, I'd capture those too. It became routine, just another tool to help our family communicate better. 6 months ago, Dad mentioned that he was thinking about retirement. At 64, his back was starting to hurt from bending over engines all day, and his hearing loss was making it harder to diagnose problems by sound, something he'd always prided himself on. The conversation about succession planning began slowly, with Dad asking hypothetical questions about what would happen to the business if something happened to him. Would we sell it? Would one of us want to take over? What about Mom's financial security? I assumed these were just preliminary discussions, the kind of planning that responsible adults do when they reach a certain age. I even offered to help research the legal and tax implications of different succession strategies, drawing on knowledge I'd gained from managing my own financial planning and from conversations with colleagues who'd inherited family businesses or dealt with estate planning for their own parents. Marcus seemed less interested in these conversations. When Dad would bring up the shop's future, Marcus would usually steer the discussion back to his music, talking about a new band he'd joined or a showcase opportunity he'd heard about. He'd been working part-time at a music store in Tempe, selling guitars and giving lessons, but it wasn't enough to cover his expenses. He still depended on Mom and Dad for help with car payments, phone bills, and the rent for the small apartment he'd finally moved into after I'd left home. The family dynamic had shifted over the years in ways I hadn't fully recognized until later. I'd become the reliable one, the daughter they could count on for practical help and emotional support. Marcus had become the dreamer, the son whose artistic pursuits required patience and financial backing. Mom and Dad had settled into their roles as supportive parents of a struggling artist and proud parents of a successful healthcare professional. On the surface it seemed balanced, but underneath, resentments were building. I started noticing the subtle comments about 3 months ago. During one Sunday dinner, Mom mentioned that she worried about Marcus's future, about what would happen to him if something happened to them. Janine has her career, her own place, her own life, she said, as if financial stability somehow meant I needed less family support or love. But Marcus is still finding his way. He needs more help getting established. Dad would nod along, and I'd feel a strange twist in my stomach, like something was shifting beneath my feet. But I told myself these were just normal parental concerns, the kind of worry that comes with having an adult child who hasn't quite launched into independence. I didn't think it meant anything more than that. The comments became more frequent. Mom would mention how proud they were of my success, but always in the context of explaining why Marcus needed extra support. "You're so capable, Janine. You've always been able to handle whatever life throws at you." It sounded like a compliment, but it felt like a dismissal, as if my capabilities somehow disqualified me from needing love, recognition, or support from my family. Marcus's financial requests also became more frequent and larger. He needed money for a new amplifier, for studio time with his latest band, for a demo recording that would finally get them the attention they deserved. Dad would discuss these requests with Mom in hushed conversations that would stop when I entered the room. When I'd ask if they needed help reviewing their budget or planning for these expenses, they'd wave me off, saying they had it handled. 2 months ago, Marcus called during one of our Sunday dinners, excited about an opportunity to tour with a band from California. They needed him to contribute $5,000 for a van and equipment, but he was confident it would lead to bigger things. I watched Dad's face as he listened to Marcus explain the opportunity, saw the hope and worry warring in his expression. After Marcus hung up, Dad sat quietly for a long time. "$5,000 is a lot," I said gently, knowing that the shop's profits, while steady, weren't enormous. "He's 29, Dad replied. "If we don't help him now, when will he ever get his chance?" Mom reached over and squeezed Dad's hand. "We can take it from the business account. It's not like we're spending money on anything else these days." I felt that twist in my stomach again, stronger this time. They were talking about dipping into business funds, money that was supposed to be for Dad's retirement, for Mom's security, for the shop's operating expenses. But they were considering it an investment in Marcus's future, not a gift or a loan that might never be repaid. Maybe we should talk about this, I suggested. Look at the numbers, make sure it won't strain things. Janine, honey, Mom said, her voice taking on the patient tone she used when she thought I was overthinking something. Not everything has to be analyzed to death. Sometimes you just have to have faith in family. That comment stung in a way I hadn't expected. I wasn't being analytical to be difficult. I was trying to protect them from making a financial decision they might regret. But somehow, my concern was being framed as lack of faith, as if wanting to be practical meant I didn't believe in Marcus or support his dreams. They gave Marcus the money. 2 weeks later, the California tour fell through when the lead singer decided to get married instead of traveling. Marcus kept the money, saying he'd use it for local opportunities, for building his portfolio and networking with other musicians in the Phoenix music scene. As far as I knew, they never asked for it back. That's when the Sunday dinner conversations began to change in tone. Dad would talk about his retirement plans with a new urgency, as if he needed to make decisions soon rather than just planning for the future. Mom would mention how Marcus was finally getting serious about his music career, how the financial support was helping him focus on his art instead of worrying about money. And both of them would look at me with expressions I couldn't quite read, as if they were waiting for me to say something, to react in a particular way. The recording device sat on the table during these conversations, capturing everything. At the time, I was focused on helping Dad remember his doctor's instructions about his new blood pressure medication and tracking the shop's quarterly tax payments. I wasn't paying attention to the undercurrents, the subtle shifts in how they talked about the future, about fairness, about what each of their children deserved. It wasn't until last month that Mom called and asked me to come over for a special family meeting. Not Sunday dinner, but a Saturday afternoon gathering to discuss something important. "We need to talk about some decisions we've been making," she said, her voice carrying a formality that made me nervous. About the shop, about our estate planning, about the future. I assumed they wanted my help navigating the legal complexities of business succession or estate planning. I had been researching these topics anyway, knowing that Dad's retirement was approaching and that these conversations were inevitable. I even prepared some notes about different options, thinking I could help them understand the tax implications and legal requirements of various approaches. I drove out to their house that Saturday afternoon with my usual recorder in my purse, ready to capture whatever important information they wanted to share. The desert sun was intense, even in late afternoon, and the familiar sight of their ranch house with its red tile roof and xeriscaped front yard should have felt comforting. Instead, I felt an anxiety I couldn't explain, a sense that this conversation was going to be different from our usual family discussions. Marcus's car was already in the driveway when I arrived, which surprised me. He rarely showed up for family meetings unless they were about him specifically, and he'd been increasingly absent from Sunday dinners over the past few months. When I knocked on the front door, Mom answered with a smile that seemed forced, the kind of expression people wear when they're dreading something but trying to appear cheerful. "Hi, sweetheart," she said, hugging me a little too tightly. "Thanks for coming. Dad and Marcus are in the living room." I followed her through the house I'd grown up in, past the family photos that lined the hallway, past the kitchen where I'd done homework at the breakfast bar while Mom cooked dinner. The living room felt different somehow, more formal, as if furniture had been rearranged for a presentation. Dad sat in his usual recliner, but his posture was rigid, uncomfortable. Marcus was on the couch, looking more serious than I'd seen him in years. "Sit down, Janine," Dad said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "We have some things we need to discuss." I settled into the chair and pulled out my recorder, setting it on the coffee table as I always did. Nobody objected, nobody seemed surprised. This had become our family's normal routine for important conversations. "We've been doing a lot of thinking," Mom began, sitting down next to Marcus on the couch. "About what's fair, about what makes sense for everyone's future." The word fair sent a chill through me. In my experience, when families start talking about fairness, it usually means someone's about to get less than they expected. Dad cleared his throat, a sound I recognized as his preparation for difficult conversations. The thing is, Janine, you've built a good life for yourself. You have your career, your apartment, your independence. You're successful, and we're proud of that. I nodded, uncertain where this was leading, but sensing it wasn't toward good news. Marcus, on the other hand, Mom continued, is still working toward his goals. He's invested so much in his music, and he's starting to see some real opportunities. But he needs more support, more stability to really succeed. The pieces started falling into place, but I didn't want to believe what I was hearing. So we've made some decisions, Dad said, looking directly at me. About the shop, about the house, about our savings. We think it's best if everything goes to Marcus. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire I hadn't seen coming. Everything. The shop that I'd helped manage, the house where I'd grown up, the savings that included profits from work I'd contributed to for years. Everything? I managed to ask, my voice smaller than I'd intended. You don't need it, Mom said, her tone matter-of-fact. You have your nursing career. You make good money. You're independent. Marcus needs the security, the foundation to build his future on. I looked at Marcus, waiting for him to say something, to object to this plan, or at least acknowledge what it meant. Instead, he nodded slowly, as if this conversation had been rehearsed. I appreciate it, he said quietly. I know it's a big responsibility, but I think I'm ready for it. Ready for it? As if inheriting everything our parents had built was a reward for being unprepared for adult life, while being responsible and successful was somehow disqualifying. What about the business? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. I've been helping with the books, learning the operations. I thought maybe we'd run it together, or at least that I'd have some involvement. Dad shifted in his chair, looking uncomfortable. Marcus is going to sell the shop, use the money to invest in his music career and buy a house. It makes more sense than trying to keep it running. Sell the shop. The business Dad had spent 37 years building, that employed 12 people, that served hundreds of customers who trusted the Desert Oasis name. Marcus was going to sell it and use the money to fund his music dreams. And the house? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Marcus will live here, Mom said. It's paid off, so he won't have housing costs while he's getting established. When we're gone, it'll be his. I sat there absorbing this information, trying to process the magnitude of what they were telling me. Not only was I being excluded from any inheritance, but the family business would be dismantled, and Marcus would get a free place to live indefinitely. Meanwhile, I would continue paying rent on my apartment, continue supporting myself entirely, continue being the responsible one who didn't need help from anyone. Is this final? I asked. Have you already changed your wills? We're meeting with the lawyer next week, Dad said. We wanted to talk to both of you first, make sure you understood our thinking, understood their thinking, as if there was logic to this decision that I was failing to grasp, as if they expected me to nod along and accept that my years of contribution and support meant nothing compared to Marcus's need for a financial foundation. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Mom and Dad explaining their reasoning, and Marcus occasionally adding his thoughts about his plans for the shop's proceeds and his vision for turning the house into a space where he could work on his music. I responded when spoken to, asked a few clarifying questions, and maintained the composure that had become my default setting in family situations. But inside I was reeling, not just from the shock of being disinherited, but from the realization that this decision revealed how my parents truly saw me. I wasn't their daughter who deserved an equal share of their legacy. I was the successful child who didn't need their love expressed through financial support. I wasn't a potential business partner who could help preserve Dad's life's work. I was the responsible one who would be fine no matter what happened. When the meeting ended, I hugged my parents goodbye like I always did, told them I'd call during the week, and drove home to my apartment in downtown Phoenix. The 30-minute drive gave me time to think, to replay the conversation, to begin processing what had just happened. But it wasn't until I got home and sat down at my kitchen table that the full impact hit me. I'd been erased from my family's future, not because I'd done anything wrong, but because I'd done everything right. My competence had become my disqualification. My success had made me expendable, and my reliability had earned me nothing but the assumption that I didn't need anything from them. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. The conversation kept replaying in my mind, but it wasn't just the words that bothered me. It was the tone, the casualness with which they'd announced their decision, the way they'd presented it, as if it were obviously the right choice. They hadn't agonized over this decision. They'd convinced themselves it was logical, fair, and even generous. But I had the recording. Every word they'd said was captured on the device that now sat on my nightstand. And as I thought about that recording, I realized there were others. Months of family conversations that I'd preserved to help Dad remember details. I'd been so focused on using the recordings for their intended purpose that I hadn't paid attention to what else they might contain. The next morning, I made coffee and sat down with my laptop and the collection of recording files I'd accumulated over the past 6 months. What I was about to discover would change everything I thought I knew about my family and the decision they'd just announced. I started with the most recent recordings and worked backward, listening to conversations I'd captured over the past 6 months with fresh ears. What I'd originally preserved to help Dad remember medical appointments and business decisions now revealed a completely different story unfolding beneath the surface of our family interactions. The first revelation came from a recording I'd made just 3 weeks earlier. Dad had called me at work to discuss his cardiologist's recommendations, and I'd started recording when I got home so I could call him back with questions about his medication schedule. But the conversation had expanded into other topics, and I'd captured Marcus calling in the middle of our discussion. Listening to it now, I heard things I'd missed while focused on Dad's health concerns. When Marcus joined the call, the dynamic shifted immediately. Dad's voice became more animated, more accommodating. Marcus started by asking about borrowing the shop's truck for a weekend gig, but the conversation quickly moved to bigger topics. "I've been thinking about what we talked about last week," Marcus said, his voice carrying a confidence I hadn't noticed during the live conversation. "About making some changes that would really set me up for success." "What kind of changes?" I'd asked, genuinely curious. "Well," Marcus had said, pausing in a way that now seemed calculated, "Dad and I have been discussing how the family resources could be used more strategically. Right now, everything's kind of scattered. Dad's got the shop, you're doing your own thing with nursing, I'm trying to build a music career. But what if we focused all our energy and resources on the family member who really needs the boost?" I remembered feeling confused during this conversation. But listening to the recording, I could hear Dad making small sounds of agreement, encouraging Marcus to continue. "The thing is, Janine," Marcus had continued, "you're already successful. You've got your career figured out, your own place, your own income. You don't really need help from the family anymore. But I'm at a crucial point where a little family investment could make a huge difference in my trajectory." A little family investment. The phrase made my stomach clench as I listened to it again. Marcus wasn't asking for help, he was positioning himself as the family member deserving of all available resources. "I think what Marcus is saying makes sense," Dad had said during that call. "Some people need more support than others at different stages of life." I'd responded diplomatically during the live conversation, something about how we were all at different places in our lives and that was normal. But listening to the recording, I could hear the subtext I'd missed. This wasn't a casual conversation about family dynamics. It was Marcus making his case for why he deserved everything. The second recording that caught my attention was from about 6 weeks earlier. Mom had called me after one of Marcus's gigs, excited because he'd apparently impressed some music industry contacts. I'd been at work during the call, so I'd called her back later and started recording to capture the details about Marcus's performance in case it led to opportunities we needed to track. "The thing about Marcus," Mom had said during that conversation, "is that he's never given up on his dreams. Even when things have been difficult, even when people have doubted him, he's stayed focused on his music. That kind of dedication deserves support." "I'm proud of him for sticking with it," I'd said, and I'd meant it. Despite my frustrations with Marcus's financial dependence, I'd always admired his commitment to his artistic goals. "You know," Mom had continued, "your father and I have been talking about how to be fair to both of our children. Fair doesn't always mean equal, especially when your children have such different needs and circumstances. Fair doesn't always mean equal." The phrase echoed in my mind as I replayed that section of the recording. Mom had been preparing me, testing how I'd respond to the concept that fairness might involve unequal treatment. "What do you mean?" I'd asked during the call. Well, you've always been so capable, so independent. Even as a child, you never needed as much help as Marcus did. You figured things out on your own, you worked hard, you made good decisions. Marcus has always needed more guidance, more support. It's just their personalities. I'd accepted this explanation during the original conversation, even felt somewhat proud that my parents saw me as capable and independent. But listening to the recording weeks later, I could hear how Mom was laying the groundwork for justifying unequal treatment. My independence wasn't just a personality trait she admired. It was evidence that I didn't deserve equal consideration. The third recording revealed even more troubling details. This one was from 2 months ago, captured during a Sunday dinner when Marcus had called to update us on his latest band situation. The group he'd been playing with had dissolved, but he was excited about a new opportunity that would require significant financial investment. I hate to keep asking for money, Marcus had said during that call, though his tone suggested he wasn't particularly troubled by it. But this could be the break I've been waiting for. There's a producer in Nashville who's interested in working with me, but I need to get there and cover studio costs. How much are we talking about? Dad had asked. Probably around $8,000 total. For travel, accommodation, studio time, and some equipment upgrades. $8,000. I'd nearly choked on my coffee when Marcus mentioned that figure during the live conversation. The shop was profitable, but that kind of money represented a significant chunk of their savings. That's a substantial investment, I'd said carefully. Investment is exactly the right word, Marcus had replied quickly. This isn't just an expense. It's an investment in my future, in our family's future. If this works out, I'll be able to pay back everything and more. If this works out, Marcus had been saying some version of that phrase for years, always confident that the next opportunity would be the one that changed everything. What's your timeline? Dad had asked. I need to be there next month. The producer's only available for a limited window. I'd listened to my parents discuss this request with growing concern. $8,000 was money they needed for Dad's retirement, for home maintenance, for their own security. But they were talking about it as if it were a reasonable investment in Marcus's career. We'll figure it out, Mom had said finally. Family supports family. But replaying that conversation now, I heard something I'd missed before. In the background, while Marcus was explaining his opportunity, I could hear Mom and Dad having a whispered side conversation. The recording had picked up fragments of their exchange. This might be good timing, Mom had whispered to Dad. For what? Dad had whispered back. For the other thing we discussed. If he's going to Nashville, he'll need a financial foundation. The other thing we discussed. They'd already been planning something, some decision that connected to Marcus's music career and his need for financial support. The inheritance discussion hadn't been a recent decision. It had been developing for months. As I continued through the recordings, a pattern emerged. Nearly every conversation from the past 4 months contained some reference to family resources, to different family members' needs, to fairness and support. Marcus had been consistently positioning himself as the family member who deserved investment, while Mom and Dad had been gradually accepting and reinforcing that narrative. But the most damaging recording was one I'd almost forgotten about. It was from 3 months ago, captured accidentally when I'd left my recorder running during a Sunday dinner while I'd stepped outside to take a work call. When I'd returned, the conversation had moved on to other topics, and I'd simply turned off the device without reviewing what had been recorded during my absence. Listening to it now, I heard my parents and Marcus having the kind of honest conversation they apparently never had when I was present. Marcus's voice was different, more manipulative, more calculating than I'd ever heard before. The thing is, Marcus had said, Janine's always going to be fine. She's one of those people who lands on her feet, no matter what happens. But me, I need more support to reach my potential. She has worked very hard, Dad had said, but his tone was uncertain, as if Marcus was convincing him to reconsider something. Of course she has. I'm not saying she hasn't earned her success, but success means she doesn't need help anymore. When someone's already established, giving them more just makes them richer. When someone's struggling to get established, giving them help can change their entire trajectory. That's true, Mom had said thoughtfully. Plus, Marcus had continued, let's be honest about what Janine wants from the family. She comes to Sunday dinners, she helps with the books, but she's got her own life. She doesn't need the shop or the house or the savings to be happy. She's already built her independence. And you haven't? Dad had asked. I'm trying to build something bigger, Marcus had said. Something that could benefit the whole family eventually. But I can't do it without support. And if we're being practical about inheritance planning, doesn't it make sense to leave resources to the family member who actually needs them? I suppose it does, Dad had said slowly. Besides, Marcus had added, Janine makes good money as a nurse. She's probably saving for her own house, building her own wealth. She doesn't need an inheritance to be secure. But for me, an inheritance could be the foundation that finally allows me to succeed. The conversation had continued for several more minutes, with Marcus systematically dismantling any argument for equal inheritance while positioning himself as the deserving beneficiary. He'd been careful never to explicitly ask for everything, instead framing his arguments in terms of logic, practicality, and what would be best for each family member. But the most chilling part of the recording came near the end, when Mom had asked Marcus directly what he thought would be fair. Honestly, Marcus had said, I think everything should go to me. Not because I deserve it more, but because I need it more. Janine's going to be successful with or without an inheritance. But with proper support, I could be successful too. And isn't that what parents want? For both their children to succeed? That makes sense, Mom had said. And think about it from Janine's perspective, Marcus had continued. She's proud of her independence. She's built her own life. Taking an inheritance might actually feel like charity to someone like her. She might prefer knowing that the family resources went to someone who really needed them. I had to pause the recording at that point, my hands shaking with anger. Marcus hadn't just convinced our parents to disinherit me. He'd convinced them that I would prefer being disinherited. He'd turned my independence into evidence that I didn't want or need family support. My success into proof that I was beyond needing love expressed through financial security. But there was more. The recording continued with Marcus outlining his specific plans for the inheritance, plans that were far more detailed than anything he'd shared during the family meeting. If I inherited the shop, he'd said, I'd sell it immediately. The real estate alone is probably worth $400,000, and the business assets would add another $100,000. That would give me enough to buy a house outright and still have capital to invest in my music career. $500,000. That was Marcus's estimate of the shop's value, money that would disappear into his music dreams while 12 employees lost their jobs and Dad's legacy was erased. What about the customers? Dad had asked. People who've been coming to us for years? They'll find other shops, Marcus had said dismissively. The important thing is maximizing the value for the family. For the family. As if dismantling Dad's life's work and eliminating my inheritance was somehow beneficial for everyone involved. The recording also revealed that Mom and Dad had already consulted with their attorney about changing their wills. The family meeting hadn't been about getting our input. It had been about informing us of decisions they'd already made. They'd scheduled the will revision for the following week, planning to finalize everything before either Marcus or I had time to fully process what was happening. As I listened to more recordings, I discovered that this campaign had been going on for months. Marcus had been having private conversations with our parents, slowly building his case while I'd been focused on my work and my own life. He'd been strategic, patient, and manipulative in ways I'd never imagined he was capable of. But he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd had all these conversations while my recording device was present, assuming that Mom and Dad would never share the recordings with me, and that I would never think to review them for anything other than Dad's medical information. I spent the entire Sunday going through every recording I'd made in the past 6 months, taking notes, time-stamping important conversations, and building a comprehensive picture of how this inheritance decision had actually been made. What I discovered was that Marcus hadn't just influenced our parents, he'd manipulated them using my own success against me. He'd turned every achievement I'd made, every sign of independence I'd shown, into evidence that I didn't need family support. He'd reframed my financial stability as proof that I was beyond needing inheritance, my emotional maturity as indication that I would understand why everything should go to him. But the most painful discovery was how quickly our parents had accepted Marcus's narrative. They hadn't agonized over this decision or struggled with the unfairness of it. Once Marcus had provided them with a framework for justifying unequal treatment, they'd embraced it with relief. It was easier to believe that giving everything to Marcus was logical and fair than to acknowledge that they were choosing one child over another. By Sunday evening, I had a clear picture of what had really happened. This wasn't a recent decision based on careful consideration of both children's needs and circumstances. This was the result of a months-long campaign by Marcus to position himself as the deserving heir, while systematically undermining my place in the family's future plans. I also had something else. Evidence. Hours of recorded conversations that revealed the true nature of this decision and the manipulation that had led to it. Marcus and my parents had no idea that their private strategy sessions had been captured, that their honest opinions about me and my role in the family had been preserved for posterity. The question now was what to do with this information. I could confront them directly, playing back their own words to show them how they'd been manipulated and how hurtful their comments had been. I could share the recordings with other family members, exposing the reality behind their inheritance decision. I could consult with an attorney about challenging the will or protecting Dad's business from being dismantled. But as I sat in my apartment that Sunday night, looking out at the Phoenix skyline and thinking about everything I'd learned, I realized I wanted something different than just confrontation or legal action. I wanted them to understand the full implications of their decision. I wanted them to see how Marcus's manipulation had worked and how their acceptance of his narrative had revealed their true feelings about me. Most importantly, I wanted to respond in a way that maintained my dignity while making it clear that I wouldn't accept being erased from my family's future without consequences. Over the next few days, I developed a plan. I would request another family meeting, ostensibly to discuss some questions I had about their inheritance decision. But this time, I would come prepared with the evidence I'd discovered. I would let them explain their reasoning once more, give them the opportunity to be honest about how they'd reached their decision. And then I would play back their own words, letting them hear exactly what they'd said about me when they thought I wasn't listening. I spent Tuesday evening preparing for this confrontation, selecting the most revealing excerpts from the recordings and organizing them in a way that would tell the complete story. I wasn't interested in revenge or drama. I wanted clarity. I wanted them to understand what they'd done and why it was unacceptable. I also made some practical preparations. I researched my rights regarding the shop's financial records, given my years of involvement in managing the books. I looked into the legal requirements for will changes in Arizona, understanding the timeline and procedures involved. I even drove by the shop Tuesday after work, looking at the business Dad had built and imagining it being sold off by Marcus to fund his music dreams. The shop was busy as it always was on weekday afternoons. I could see Dad through the office window, talking to a customer about their repair estimate. Two of the mechanics were working under the lift, and another was explaining something to a young woman about her car's maintenance needs. This was a functioning business that employed good people and served the community. Marcus's plan to sell it wasn't just about inheritance. It was about destroying something valuable for his personal benefit. Wednesday morning, I called Mom and asked for another family meeting. I told her I'd been thinking about their decision and had some questions I wanted to discuss before they finalized anything with the attorney. "Of course, honey," Mom said, sounding relieved. "I was hoping you'd want to talk more about it." "Saturday afternoon again?" "That works perfectly," I said. "Should I ask Marcus to be there too?" "Definitely. I think it's important that we're all part of this conversation." "I'm so glad you're being understanding about this," Mom said. "I was worried you might be upset." "Upset?" As if being disinherited was something I should accept gracefully. As if discovering my family's real opinion of me was a minor disappointment rather than a fundamental betrayal. "We'll talk about everything on Saturday," I said. Friday evening, I made my final preparations. I charged my recording device, organized my notes, and mentally rehearsed what I wanted to say. I wasn't nervous about the confrontation itself. After 8 years as a nurse, I'd learned how to stay calm under pressure and communicate clearly in difficult situations. But I was emotionally preparing myself. for the possibility that this conversation would fundamentally change my relationship with my family. Once I played those recordings, there would be no going back to the way things were. They would know that I'd heard their real opinions, and I would know exactly where I stood in their priorities. Saturday morning, I woke up feeling strangely peaceful. I'd spent months being the dutiful daughter, helping with the shop's books, supporting Dad's health management, maintaining family relationships while slowly being pushed out of the family's future. Today, that would end. Today, they would hear the truth about their decision and its consequences. I drove out to Scottsdale with my recorder in my purse and a folder containing printed excerpts from the most damaging conversations. The desert landscape looked the same as always, but I felt like I was seeing it through different eyes. This might be one of the last times I made this drive as a welcome family member. After today, everything would be different. The family house looked exactly as it had the previous weekend, but when I knocked on the door, I noticed details I'd missed before. The porch needed painting, and one of the window screens was torn. These were the kinds of maintenance issues that would become Marcus's responsibility once he inherited the house, though I doubted he'd noticed them, or planned for the ongoing costs of homeownership. Mom answered the door with the same forced smile she'd worn the previous week, and I followed her into the living room where Dad and Marcus were already waiting. The scene was nearly identical to the previous Saturday, except this time I was the one who'd called the meeting. "Thanks for agreeing to talk more about this," I said, settling into the same chair I'd occupied the week before. "I've been thinking about everything you told me, and I have some questions." I placed my recorder on the coffee table, just as I always did for important family conversations. None of them objected or seemed surprised by its presence. "Of course," Dad said. "We want you to be comfortable with our decision." Comfortable. As if comfort was the issue, rather than fairness or honesty or respect. "I guess I'm trying to understand how you reached this conclusion," I said. "It's such a significant decision, and I want to make sure I understand your reasoning." "Well," Mom began, "we talked about this last week. You're successful and independent. Marcus needs more support to reach his potential." "But how did you decide that?" I pressed. "Was this something you'd been thinking about for a while, or was it a recent realization?" Dad and Mom exchanged glances, and I could see them trying to decide how much to reveal about their decision-making process. "We've been having conversations about the future for several months," Dad said carefully, "thinking about what would be best for everyone." "What kind of conversations?" I asked. "Just family discussions," Mom said, "about everyone's needs and circumstances." Marcus had been unusually quiet since I'd arrived, but now he spoke up. "I think what they're saying is that they want to be strategic about how family resources are used. It makes sense to invest in the family member who needs the boost." "Is that how you see inheritance?" I asked him directly. "As an investment in the family member who needs a boost?" "Well, yeah," Marcus said. "I mean, what's the point of giving money to someone who already has money? It's more impactful to help someone who's struggling to get established." "And you see yourself as struggling to get established?" "I'm 29 years old and still trying to build a career in music," Marcus said. "Yeah, I'd say I'm struggling compared to someone who already has a steady job and their own place." The conversation continued for another 15 minutes, with my parents and Marcus explaining their reasoning and me asking clarifying questions. They were remarkably consistent in their messaging, sticking to the narrative that this decision was logical, fair, and beneficial for everyone involved. Finally, I decided it was time to introduce the evidence I'd discovered. "I appreciate you explaining your thinking," I said. "But I have to tell you, I've been reviewing some of our family conversations from the past few months, and I'm hearing some things that concern me." "What kind of things?" Mom asked. "Well, for example," I said, picking up my phone and scrolling to the first recording excerpt I'd prepared. "There was this conversation from about 3 months ago." I pressed play, and Marcus's voice filled the room. "The thing is, Janine's always going to be fine. She's one of those people who lands on her feet no matter what happens. But me? I need more support to reach my potential." The color drained from Marcus's face as he recognized his own words. Mom and Dad looked confused at first, then alarmed as they realized what I was playing. "Plus," the recording continued with Marcus's voice, "let's be honest about what Janine wants from the family. She comes to Sunday dinners, she helps with the books, but she's got her own life. She doesn't need the shop or the house or the savings to be happy. Janine, Dad started to say, but I held up my hand. There's more, I said, and played the next excerpt. Honestly, I think everything should go to me. Not because I deserve it more, but because I need it more. Janine's going to be successful, with or without an inheritance. The room was completely silent except for Marcus's recorded voice explaining why he deserved everything and I deserved nothing. When that excerpt ended, I looked around the room at 3 people who looked like they'd been caught in a lie they didn't remember telling. So my question is, I said calmly, was this really a decision based on careful consideration of what's fair? Or was this the result of Marcus convincing you that I don't need or deserve equal treatment? The confrontation was about to begin in earnest, and for the first time in months, I felt like I had the upper hand in a family conversation. They were about to learn that their private strategy sessions hadn't been as private as they'd thought, and that their honest opinions about me had been preserved for posterity. More importantly, they were about to discover that the daughter they'd dismissed as independently successful was also independently capable of fighting back. Marcus was the first to break the silence, his face flushed with a mixture of anger and panic. You recorded private conversations? That's completely inappropriate, Janine. We were having personal family discussions. Personal family discussions about me, I replied evenly. Discussions where you systematically convinced our parents that I don't deserve equal treatment because I'm too successful to need their love or support. That's not what I said, Marcus protested, though we'd all just heard exactly what he'd said. Actually, it is precisely what you said, I continued, scrolling to another recording. Should I play the part where you told them that taking an inheritance might feel like charity to someone like me? Or the part where you estimated the shop's value at $500,000 and explained how you'd sell it immediately? Dad's face went pale. You want to sell the shop? Marcus shot me a look of pure fury before turning to Dad. I said that might be an option. I didn't say it was definite. You said you'd sell it immediately, I corrected. You said the real estate alone was worth $400,000, and the business assets would add another $100,000. You had it all calculated. Janine, Mom interrupted, her voice shaky, we need to talk about why you were recording us without permission. I had permission, I said calmly. You gave me permission months ago to record family conversations because of Dad's hearing issues. Every single conversation I've played was recorded with your knowledge and consent. The only difference is that you forgot the recorder was there when you thought you were having private strategy sessions. Strategy sessions? Dad repeated, looking confused. I played another excerpt, this one from 6 weeks earlier. Fair doesn't always mean equal, especially when your children have such different needs and circumstances. Mom's own voice filled the room, and I watched her expression change as she heard herself laying the groundwork for justifying unequal treatment. You see, I said, this wasn't a recent decision based on careful consideration. This was a months-long campaign where Marcus convinced you that fairness means giving him everything and me nothing. And you bought into it because it was easier than acknowledging that you were choosing one child over another. That's not true, Mom said, but her voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? I asked, playing another clip. This time it was Dad's voice. Some people need more support than others at different stages of life. And this one, I continued, playing Marcus again. Success means she doesn't need help anymore. When someone's already established, giving them more just makes them richer. I looked directly at Marcus. You turned my achievements into disqualifications. Every success I've had, every sign of independence I've shown, you used as evidence that I don't deserve equal treatment from our parents. Marcus stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. You're taking everything out of context. Those were theoretical discussions about resource allocation and family priorities. Resource allocation? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Is that what you call convincing our parents to disinherit me? Resource allocation? Nobody's being disinherited, Mom said quickly. We're just trying to be practical about what each of you needs. Mom, I said, my voice gentle but firm, You told me last week that everything goes to Marcus. The house, the shop, the savings, all of it. In what universe is that not disinheritance? Dad cleared his throat uncomfortably. Maybe we used the wrong words. We didn't mean to make it sound so final. Didn't you? I asked, pulling out my phone again. Let me play you the conversation where you discussed meeting with the attorney to finalize the will changes. The next recording excerpt featured Dad's voice. We're meeting with the lawyer next week. We wanted to talk to both of you first, make sure you understood our thinking. And Marcus's response, I continued, playing the next part, I think it's smart to get everything finalized quickly. The sooner we have clarity, the better. I looked around the room at 3 people who were beginning to understand that their private conversations hadn't been as private as they'd believed. So help me understand, I said, if this isn't final, if this is just theoretical resource allocation, why were you meeting with an attorney next week to change your wills? The silence stretched uncomfortably long. Finally, Dad spoke up. We thought it was the right decision based on everyone's circumstances. Whose circumstances? I asked. Mine? Because I don't recall anyone asking me about my circumstances, my goals, my feelings about the family business, or what I might want from our relationship. We know your circumstances, Mom said defensively. You're successful, you're independent, you don't need financial help. How do you know what I need? I asked. When's the last time any of you asked me about my goals, my struggles, my dreams? When's the last time anyone in this family showed interest in my life beyond what I could do to help with Dad's health or the shop's books? That's not fair, Mom protested. We care about your life. Do you? I challenged. Because from these recordings, it sounds like you see me as the successful daughter who's moved beyond needing family support. You've turned my competence into evidence that I don't need love, attention, or inclusion in family decisions. I played another excerpt, this one with Mom's voice. She's always been so capable, so independent. Even as a child, you never needed as much help as Marcus did. You see, I said, even as a child, I was getting less because I needed less. My independence wasn't something you were proud of. It was an excuse to give me less attention, less support, less consideration. Marcus returned to his seat, his earlier anger replaced by something that looked almost like defeat. Janine, you have to understand, I'm running out of time. I'm 29 years old, and if I don't make it in music soon, I'll have to give up and find a regular job. This inheritance could be my last real chance. And what about my chances? I asked. What about my dreams, my goals, my future? You already have a future, Marcus said. You have a career, savings, your own place. You're set. I'm set? I repeated. Marcus, I make a decent salary as a nurse, but I'm not wealthy. I rent an apartment because I can't afford to buy a house in Phoenix on my income. I work 12-hour shifts in a cardiac unit, dealing with life and death situations every day. I come home exhausted, worried about my patients, stressed about hospital politics and healthcare challenges. Does that sound set to you? But you chose that life, Marcus said. You wanted to be a nurse, you wanted independence. Yes, I chose my career because I wanted to help people, and because I worked hard to get there. But choosing independence doesn't mean I don't want or deserve family support. It doesn't mean I should be excluded from inheritance planning because I've been responsible. I turned to my parents. Do you realize what you've taught me? You've taught me that being responsible gets punished. That working hard and being successful means I don't deserve equal treatment. That my accomplishments make me less worthy of family support, not more. Dad looked genuinely distressed. We never meant to send that message. But that's exactly the message you sent, I said. And it's the message Marcus used to convince you that everything should go to him. I played one more recording, the most damaging one. She's proud of her independence. She's built her own life. Taking an inheritance might actually feel like charity to someone like her. She might prefer knowing that the family resources went to someone who really needed them. Marcus's voice filled the room, explaining how I would prefer being disinherited, how it would align with my values and personality. When it ended, I looked directly at him. Did you really convince them that I would prefer not to inherit anything? That being excluded from my family's legacy would make me happy. Marcus couldn't meet my eyes. I was trying to think about what would be best for everyone. No, I said firmly. You were trying to think about what would be best for you. And you used my relationship with our parents, my history of being helpful and accommodating, to convince them that I didn't want or need equal treatment. Maybe we should take a break, Mom suggested, clearly overwhelmed by the revelations. No, I said. We're going to finish this conversation. Because there's more. I played the recording where Marcus had outlined his specific plans for the inheritance, including selling the shop immediately and using the proceeds to buy a house and fund his music career. Dad, I said as the recording ended, you spent 37 years building Desert Oasis Auto. 37 years creating something that employs 12 people and serves this community. Marcus's plan is to sell it immediately and use the money for his music career. Is that really what you want to happen to your life's work? Dad looked stricken. I thought maybe Marcus would want to be involved in running it. He just told you he wants to sell it, I said. Not eventually. Not if it doesn't work out. Immediately. He's already calculated the value and planned how to spend the proceeds. Marcus, Dad said, turning to his son. Is that true? Do you want to sell the shop? Marcus shifted uncomfortably. I'm not a mechanic, Dad. I don't know anything about running an auto repair business. It makes more sense to liquidate the asset and use the capital more strategically. Liquidate the asset, I repeated. That's how you see Dad's life's work? As an asset to be liquidated? That's not what I meant, Marcus said quickly. It's exactly what you meant, I replied. You don't see the shop as Dad's legacy, or as a business that supports 12 families. You see it as a source of money for your music career. I turned back to my parents. And that's fine, if that's what you want. But let's be honest about what's happening here. You're not giving Marcus an inheritance to help him succeed. You're funding the destruction of Dad's business, so Marcus can continue avoiding adult responsibility. That's harsh, Janine, Mom said. Is it? I asked. Marcus is 29 years old. He's been pursuing music for over a decade with financial support from you, and he's never achieved sustainable success. Now he wants you to sell Dad's business to fund another attempt. At what point does family support become family enabling? I just need one real opportunity, Marcus said defensively. One chance with proper backing. You've had opportunities, I said. You've had thousands of dollars in support over the years. The California tour that fell through, the Nashville producer who required $8,000, the equipment purchases, the studio time. How much money have you invested in Marcus's music career, and what do you have to show for it? Mom and Dad exchanged uncomfortable glances. They'd never calculated the total amount they'd given Marcus over the years, but I could see them mentally adding up the requests, the loans that were never repaid, the investments that never produced returns. That's different, Mom said weakly. Those were smaller amounts. Were they? I asked. Because I've been helping with your books for years, and I've seen the pattern. Marcus asks for money, you give it to him, and then a few months later he asks for more. It's been happening for years. I pulled out a notebook I'd brought with me. I went through the shop's financial records last week. In the past 3 years alone, you've given Marcus over $30,000 in loans and gifts. $30,000 that came from business profits, from money you needed for retirement planning. You had no right to look at those records, Marcus said angrily. I had every right, I replied. I've been helping manage those books for years. I know every transaction, every expense, every loan. And what I see is a pattern of you using family resources as your personal funding source while contributing nothing back to the family or the business. I contribute, Marcus protested. I help around the house, I spend time with Mom and Dad. You live in their house rent-free and borrow their money, I corrected. That's not contributing, that's taking advantage. The room fell silent again, but this time the silence felt different. Heavier. More final. I could see my parents beginning to understand the reality of what they'd agreed to, and I could see Marcus realizing that his carefully constructed narrative was falling apart. Here's what I think really happened, I said, looking around the room. Marcus realized that his music career wasn't going to provide him with financial security, so he decided to secure his future by convincing you to give him everything. He used my success against me, turning my achievements into evidence that I don't need family support. And you went along with it because it felt easier than acknowledging that you have one child who's responsible and one who isn't. That's not true, Dad said, but his voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? I asked. Dad, when's the last time Marcus helped with anything around here without being asked? When's the last time he offered to contribute to household expenses or help with your medical appointments? When's the last time he showed up for Sunday dinner without needing something? Dad couldn't answer, and I could see him thinking through recent interactions with Marcus, measuring them against the pattern I'd described. Now think about my interactions with this family, I continued. I come to Sunday dinners every week. I help with the shop's books. I've been managing Dad's medical appointment schedule and medication tracking. I've helped with home repairs, tax preparation, insurance claims. I've been present and involved in this family's daily life for years. We appreciate all of that, Mom said quietly. Do you? I asked, because according to these recordings, what you appreciate is having a daughter who doesn't need anything from you. You've taken my helpfulness for granted while rewarding Marcus for being helpless. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the desert landscape that had been the backdrop for my entire life. When I turned back to face my family, I felt calmer than I had since this whole situation began. I want you to understand something, I said. This isn't really about money. I make a good living, and I don't need an inheritance to be financially secure. This is about what your decision says about how you see me, how you value my contributions to this family, and what you think I deserve. We value your contributions, Dad said. No, you don't, I replied. You take them for granted. You've created a family dynamic where my competence disqualifies me from receiving equal treatment, where my success means I don't need love and support expressed through inclusion in family planning. I picked up my recorder and my notebook, preparing to leave. But here's what you haven't considered. If I don't deserve equal treatment as a daughter, then you don't deserve my continued contributions as a family member. What does that mean? Mom asked, alarm creeping into her voice. It means that if I'm too successful to need family support, then you're too capable to need my help, I said. No more help with the books. No more managing Dad's medical appointments. No more Sunday dinners where I pretend everything is fine while you plan to erase me from the family's future. Janine, you're being dramatic, Marcus said. Am I? I asked. Marcus, you're about to inherit everything. That includes the responsibility for everything. Dad's healthcare management, Mom's future security, the shop's financial planning until you sell it, all the practical things I've been helping with for years. Congratulations. It's all yours now. I could see the realization dawning on Marcus's face. He'd been so focused on the financial benefits of inheriting everything that he hadn't considered the responsibilities that came with it. You can't just abandon us, Mom said, tears starting to form in her eyes. I'm not abandoning you, I said. I'm accepting the role you've assigned me. You've decided I'm too independent to need family support, so I'm going to be independent. You've decided Marcus deserves everything because he needs more help, so he can provide all the help you need. But Marcus doesn't know how to do the books, Dad said practically. Then he'll learn, I replied, or you'll hire someone. Either way, it's not my responsibility anymore. I walked toward the door, then paused and turned back. I want you to think about something. In all those recorded conversations where you discussed what would be fair, did anyone ever mention my feelings? Did anyone consider how I might react to being told that my lifetime of contributions to this family earned me nothing? Did anyone think about whether the responsible daughter might need to be included in inheritance planning? None of them answered. The answer is no, I continued. Because you stopped seeing me as someone with needs and feelings. You saw me as the successful daughter who would understand and accept whatever you decided. You forgot that independence doesn't mean invulnerability, and that being capable doesn't mean being disposable. I reached the front door before Marcus called after me. Janine, wait. Maybe we can work something out. Maybe there's a compromise. I turned back one final time. A compromise? Marcus, you spent months convincing our parents that I deserve nothing, and they agreed with you. The only reason you're suggesting a compromise now is because you've realized that inheriting everything means being responsible for everything. That's not compromise, that's panic. We could split things differently, Dad offered. Maybe Marcus gets the house and you get the shop. Dad, I said sadly, you don't understand. This isn't about the division of assets anymore. This is about trust, respect, and love. You've shown me that all three are conditional in this family. They depend on me being useful without being needy, successful without being deserving, present without being equal. I opened the front door, letting the desert heat rush into the air-conditioned house. When you're ready to have a conversation about why this happened and what it means, call me. But I'm done pretending that everything is fine when it clearly isn't. As I walked to my car, I could hear urgent voices behind me, my family finally having the honest conversation they should have had months ago. But it was too late for that conversation to change anything. They'd revealed how they really saw me, and I'd revealed that I wouldn't accept being treated as less than equal in my own family. The drive back to Phoenix gave me time to think about what came next. I'd accomplished what I'd set out to do. They now understood how their decision had been made and what it really meant. But I'd also burned bridges in a way that felt both necessary and final. For the first time in months, though, I felt like I was the one making decisions about my life instead of simply reacting to other people's choices. And that felt like progress, even if it came at the cost of the family relationships I'd spent my entire life nurturing. The first week after the confrontation passed in a strange kind of silence. My phone remained quiet except for work calls and a few text messages from colleagues. No Sunday dinner invitation. No calls from Mom asking about Dad's medication schedule. No requests for help with the shop's quarterly reports. For the first time in years, my weekends were entirely my own. I spent Saturday morning sleeping in, something I hadn't done since nursing school. When I finally got up around 10, I made coffee and sat on my small balcony overlooking downtown Phoenix, watching the city wake up below me. The silence felt both liberating and unsettling. I'd grown so accustomed to being needed by my family that I wasn't entirely sure what to do with myself when those obligations disappeared. Sunday was harder. For 8 years, I'd spent Sunday afternoons in Scottsdale, helping with family business and sharing dinner. The routine had become so ingrained that I found myself automatically thinking about the drive out there, before remembering that I was no longer welcome in the same way. Instead, I went for a long hike in South Mountain Park, letting the desert landscape and physical exertion clear my mind. Monday brought the first sign that my absence was being felt. Dad called my work number during my lunch break, his voice uncertain and somewhat confused. Janine, honey, I'm looking at these insurance forms from the cardiologist, and I can't remember what Dr. Martinez said about the new medication dosage. Do you have your notes from the last appointment? I'd been managing Dad's medical appointments and medication schedules for over 2 years, taking detailed notes and maintaining a file system that helped him track multiple prescriptions and follow-up requirements. It was complex enough that even I sometimes needed to reference previous conversations to keep everything straight. Dad, I said gently, I don't think I should be handling your medical management anymore. Marcus is going to inherit everything, so he should probably take over these responsibilities. Marcus doesn't know anything about my medical situation, Dad said, sounding panicked. Then maybe it's time for him to learn, I replied. Or you could ask your doctor's office to help you set up a system. They have patient coordinators who specialize in exactly this kind of thing. But you know all the details, all the history. You understand what the doctors are saying. I understand it because I took the time to learn it, I said. Marcus can do the same thing if he wants to be involved in your care. There was a long pause before Dad spoke again. Janine, you can't just stop helping with everything because you're upset about the inheritance. I'm not stopping because I'm upset, I corrected. I'm stopping because you've made it clear that I'm too independent to need family support, which means you're too capable to need my support. If I don't deserve to be included in family planning, then you don't get to include me in family obligations. That's not the same thing, Dad protested. Isn't it? I asked. Dad, you can't have it both ways. You can't exclude me from being a daughter when it comes to inheritance, but include me when it comes to being helpful. Either I'm part of this family or I'm not. Dad hung up without saying goodbye, something he'd never done before. I sat in the hospital break room, staring at my phone and feeling the weight of what I'd set in motion. But I also felt something else. Relief. For the first time in years, someone else would have to figure out Dad's medication schedule, coordinate his appointments, and manage his medical questions. Tuesday evening brought a text message from Mom. Please call me, we need to talk about your father's doctor appointment tomorrow. Marcus tried to help, but he doesn't understand the questions they're asking. I read the message twice before deleting it without responding. Wednesday afternoon, another text. Janine, this is an emergency. Your father is in the ER. Marcus couldn't answer the doctor's questions about his medications and medical history. That text made my heart race. Despite everything that had happened, the thought of Dad in medical distress triggered every protective instinct I had. I called Mom immediately. What happened? I asked as soon as she answered. He had chest pains at work, Mom said, her voice shaky. Marcus drove him to the hospital, but when the doctors asked about his medications and medical history, Marcus didn't know anything. They're having trouble figuring out what's safe to give him. Did you bring his medication list? I asked. What medication list? I closed my eyes, remembering the detailed medication log I'd been maintaining for Dad, complete with dosages, timing, prescribing doctors, and notes about side effects and interactions. It was stored in a file folder on their kitchen counter, clearly labeled and updated regularly. Mom, there's a blue folder on your kitchen counter labeled Dad's medical information. It has everything the doctors need. Marcus is at the house getting it now, Mom said. But Janine, this is exactly why we need your help. You know all of this information. I know it because I organized it and maintained it, I said. Everything the doctors need is in that folder. If Marcus had taken 5 minutes to familiarize himself with Dad's medical situation, this wouldn't be a crisis. He didn't know he needed to, Mom said defensively. Mom, Dad has a heart condition that requires careful medication management. Marcus is about to inherit everything, including the responsibility for Dad's care. If he doesn't know he needs to understand Dad's medical situation, then he's not ready for the responsibilities he's claiming he wants. This isn't the time for proving a point, Mom said, her voice rising. Your father could be having a heart attack. This isn't about proving a point, I replied. This is about the natural consequences of the decisions you've made. Marcus wanted to be the responsible family member who gets everything. Being responsible means being prepared for emergencies. So you're just going to let your father suffer because you're angry with us? The question hit me like a physical blow. Mom, I would never let Dad suffer. But I'm not going to rescue Marcus from a situation he should have been prepared for. If he can't handle Dad's medical emergency, how is he going to handle inheriting a business and all the family responsibilities that come with it? There was silence on the other end of the line. Finally, Mom spoke again, her voice quieter. Will you at least come to the hospital? In case the doctors have questions about his medical history. I wrestled with the decision for several long moments. Every instinct told me to rush to the hospital, to take charge of the medical situation, to ensure Dad got proper care. But I also knew that rushing in would undermine everything I'd said about Marcus needing to take responsibility. I'll come, I said finally, but I'm not taking over the situation. Marcus needs to handle this. I'll only speak to the doctors if there's information that isn't in the medical file. When I arrived at Phoenix General, I found Mom in the cardiac emergency waiting area, looking older and more fragile than I'd ever seen her. Marcus was pacing near the vending machines, his phone pressed to his ear. When he saw me, he ended his call and walked over. "Thank God you're here," he said. "The doctors have been asking all these technical questions about Dad's medications and procedures, and I don't know any of it." "Did you bring the medical file?" I asked. "Yeah, but it's just a bunch of papers. I don't understand what any of it means." I looked at Marcus, really looked at him, and saw something I'd never noticed before. He wasn't just unprepared for this emergency. He was completely overwhelmed by the idea of being responsible for another person's well-being. The confidence he'd shown when discussing inheritance and family resources was gone, replaced by genuine fear and confusion. "Marcus," I said gently, "if you inherit everything, you're going to be responsible for Mom and Dad's care as they age. Medical emergencies, financial decisions, housing arrangements, all of it. Are you prepared for that?" I thought we'd figure it out as we went along," Marcus said, his voice small. "You can't figure out medical emergencies as you go along," I replied. "You need to understand their health conditions, their medications, their insurance, their preferences for care. You need to have plans and systems in place." Marcus slumped into a waiting room chair. I didn't think about any of that. I was just thinking about the money, about finally having financial security. For the first time since this whole situation began, I felt something like sympathy for Marcus. He'd been so focused on inheriting wealth that he'd never considered inheriting responsibility. The reality of what he'd asked for was finally becoming clear to him. A doctor emerged from the treatment area and approached us. "Are you Robert Castillo's family?" "Yes," Mom said, standing up quickly. "How is he?" "He's stable," the doctor said. "It wasn't a heart attack, but he did have a significant cardiac event related to his medication interactions. We're going to keep him overnight for observation and make some adjustments to his prescription regimen." "Medication interactions?" Mom asked, looking confused. The doctor consulted his chart. "Mr. Castillo is taking several medications that can interact with each other, and it appears the interactions may have triggered tonight's episode. We need to review his entire medication list with someone who understands his medical history." Marcus looked at me with panic in his eyes. I sighed and stepped forward. "I've been managing his medication schedule and medical appointments," I told the doctor. "I have detailed records of everything he's taking and when, plus notes from all his recent doctor visits." The doctor looked relieved. "Perfect. Can you walk me through his current regimen and any recent changes?" I spent the next 30 minutes with the doctor, reviewing Dad's medications, explaining the timeline of recent prescription changes, and providing context about his various health conditions. Marcus and Mom watched this interaction with expressions that ranged from gratitude to growing realization of how complex Dad's care actually was. When the medical discussion was finished and Dad was settled in his room for the night, the three of us found ourselves in the hospital cafeteria. Mom bought coffee for everyone, but none of us seemed interested in drinking it. "I had no idea it was so complicated," Marcus said finally. "All those medications, all those interactions and timing requirements. How do you keep track of all that?" "Practice," I said, "and paying attention during doctor appointments, and taking notes, and asking questions when I don't understand something." "I never paid attention during doctor visits," Marcus admitted. "I figured you had it handled." "I did have it handled," I said. "But if you're going to be responsible for Mom and Dad's future, you need to handle it." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "What if I can't? What if I'm not good at this kind of thing?" "Then you'll need to learn," I said, "or hire people to help, or reconsider whether you really want the responsibility that comes with inheriting everything." "But the money," Marcus said weakly. "Marcus," I said, looking directly at him, "if you're only interested in the money, then sell everything. Take your inheritance and move away. But don't pretend you want to be the responsible family member if you're not willing to actually be responsible." Mom had been unusually quiet during this conversation, but now she spoke up. "Janine, we made a mistake." I turned to look at her, surprised by the admission. "We thought about the inheritance as if it were just about money," Mom continued. "We didn't think about everything else that comes with it. We didn't think about how much you actually do for this family, or how much we depend on you for things that have nothing to do with your job or your income." "Like what?" I asked. "Like understanding Dad's medical needs. Like knowing how to talk to doctors and insurance companies. Like being calm in emergencies. Like being someone we can count on to make good decisions when we can't." Mom's voice broke slightly. "Marcus isn't ready for any of that. And maybe he never will be ready for it. But we convinced ourselves that giving him everything would somehow make him ready." "So what happens now?" I asked. "I don't know," Mom said honestly. But I know we can't keep pretending that inheritance is just about dividing up assets. It's about dividing up responsibilities too. And we've been asking Marcus to take on responsibilities he's not prepared for, while pushing away the daughter who's been handling those responsibilities for years. Marcus looked back and forth between us, his expression shifting from confusion to something that might have been understanding. Maybe, he said slowly, maybe I don't want everything. Maybe I just want enough to get started with my music, to have some security while I figure out my career. But all this other stuff, all the responsibility for taking care of mom and dad, all the medical management and business decisions, maybe that should stay with someone who's actually good at it. I studied Marcus's face, trying to determine whether this was genuine realization or just a reaction to being overwhelmed by tonight's crisis. Are you saying you want to change the inheritance plan? I asked. I'm saying maybe the inheritance plan was wrong from the beginning, Marcus replied. Maybe we should have thought about who can actually handle what, instead of just who needs money the most. Mom reached across the table and took my hand. Janine, would you consider coming back? Not just for tonight, but for real. We need to figure out how to fix this. I looked down at her hand holding mine, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. The months of manipulation, the painful family meeting, the confrontation with recorded evidence, and now this crisis that had forced everyone to confront the reality of their decisions. I'll consider it, I said finally, but things can't go back to the way they were. If you want my help, if you want me to be part of this family's future, then I need to be treated as an equal partner in family decisions, not just as the helpful daughter who doesn't need anything in return. What does that mean exactly? Mom asked. It means equal inheritance, equal voice in family decisions, and equal respect for my contributions, I said. It means no more assuming that my success disqualifies me from needing family support. It means recognizing that independence doesn't mean invulnerability. And if we agree to that? Marcus asked. Then we can talk about how to restructure things in a way that makes sense for everyone, I said. Maybe you get enough money to pursue your music career without the pressure of inheriting responsibilities you're not ready for. Maybe I get equal inheritance and continue handling the things I'm good at. Maybe we find a way to be a family where everyone contributes according to their abilities and receives according to their needs. That sounds fair, Mom said softly. Fairer than what we had planned, Marcus agreed. I squeezed Mom's hand. It's going to take time to rebuild trust. Tonight was a wake-up call, but it's going to take more than one crisis to fix the damage that's been done. We understand, Mom said. But we want to try. As we sat in the hospital cafeteria, talking about how to repair our family relationships, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Not naive hope that everything would immediately go back to normal, but realistic hope that we could build something better than what we'd had before. The crisis had forced everyone to confront the reality of their choices, and that confrontation had opened the door to honest conversations about responsibility, fairness, and what it really means to be a family. It wasn't going to be easy, but for the first time since this whole situation began, it felt possible. 6 months later, I signed the papers that made me a 50% owner of Desert Oasis Auto. Marcus had decided to accept a lump sum payment of $100,000 to pursue his music career, without the burden of business ownership or family caregiving responsibilities. Dad kept 20% ownership to maintain his connection to the company he'd built, while I assumed operational control and the long-term inheritance rights. The negotiation process hadn't been easy. It took 3 family meetings with a mediator, 2 sessions with an estate planning attorney, and countless conversations about roles, responsibilities, and expectations. But slowly we'd built something that felt genuinely fair, rather than artificially equal. Marcus used his inheritance money to move to Austin, where he joined a band that actually paid its members and started teaching guitar lessons to supplement his income. He called every few weeks, updating us on his progress and sounding more content than I'd heard him in years. Removing the pressure of inheriting everything had freed him to pursue music without the weight of family obligations he wasn't equipped to handle. Mom and Dad adjusted to the new arrangement with surprising grace. Dad enjoyed having a succession plan that preserved his business rather than liquidating it, and Mom felt more secure knowing that their medical and financial needs would be managed by someone who understood both the practical requirements and the emotional significance of those responsibilities. I hired a part-time administrator to handle the shop's daily bookkeeping, which freed me to focus on strategic planning and customer relations while maintaining my nursing career. The business had grown by 15% since I'd taken over management, partly because customers appreciated the improved organization, and partly because word had spread about our commitment to honest pricing and quality work. The most significant change was in our family dynamic. Sunday dinners resumed, but they felt different now, more balanced. I was included in financial discussions, consulted about major decisions, and treated as an equal partner in family planning rather than just a helpful daughter who didn't need anything in return. During one particularly memorable Sunday, Dad pulled out the original inheritance documents we'd never signed and ceremonially shredded them at the dinner table. "Those represented the family we used to be," he said, "not the family we want to be going forward." I'd also used the experience to make some changes in my own life. I started dating again, something I'd put on hold while managing family obligations. I joined a hiking group that explored different desert trails every weekend. I even took a pottery class, discovering a creative outlet I'd never expected to enjoy. The most unexpected benefit was my relationship with Marcus. Without the competition for family resources, we'd begun to connect as siblings rather than rivals. He'd visited Phoenix twice since moving to Austin, and both visits had been genuinely enjoyable. We talked about his music, my career, and family memories, without the underlying tension that had poisoned our interactions for years. One evening, while reviewing the shop's quarterly reports, I found myself thinking about the recordings that had started this whole journey. I'd kept them, not out of spite, but as a reminder of how easily family relationships could be manipulated when people weren't paying attention to their underlying dynamics. But I'd also learned something important about those recordings. They'd captured not just Marcus's manipulation and our parents' poor decision-making, but also my own patterns of accepting less than I deserved. I'd been so focused on being the helpful, accommodating daughter that I'd forgotten to advocate for my own needs and interests. The confrontation had been necessary, but it was the aftermath that had taught me the most valuable lessons. Standing up for myself wasn't a one-time event. It was an ongoing process of recognizing my worth and insisting that others recognize it too. Dr. Martinez, Dad's cardiologist, had commented during a recent appointment that Dad's overall health had improved significantly since I'd taken over coordinating his care. "Having someone who understands the complexity of his medical needs makes all the difference," he'd said. It was exactly the kind of validation I'd needed but had never received from my family until recently. The shop's employees had also embraced the transition enthusiastically. Several of them had mentioned feeling more secure about their jobs, knowing that the business would continue operating rather than being sold off. Miguel, the lead mechanic who'd worked for Dad for 12 years, had even suggested some operational improvements that had increased efficiency and customer satisfaction. I'd realized that inheriting the business wasn't just about receiving something valuable. It was about preserving something meaningful. Dad had built more than a company. He'd created a community resource that employed good people and served customers who trusted us with their vehicles and their safety. Being able to protect and grow that legacy felt more rewarding than any amount of money could have been. Mom had started helping at the shop 1 day a week, handling customer service calls and managing appointment scheduling. She'd discovered that she enjoyed the work and was surprisingly good at managing difficult customers. "I should have been more involved in the business years ago," she'd told me. "I had no idea how much I was missing." The experience had also changed how I approached my nursing career. I'd always been competent and dedicated, but I'd also been somewhat passive about advancement opportunities. Now I was pursuing a management position in the cardiac unit, applying the leadership skills I'd developed through running the shop to my hospital work. 1 year after that first devastating family meeting, we gathered again in my parents' living room. This time the conversation was about planning Dad's retirement celebration and discussing the shop's 5-year expansion strategy. Marcus joined us by video call from Austin, where he'd just been hired as a music instructor at a local community college. "I never thanked you properly," Marcus said during that call, "for forcing us to confront what we were really doing. I was so focused on getting money that I never thought about whether I actually wanted the responsibilities that came with it." And I never thanked you, I replied, for showing me that I needed to stop accepting less than I deserve just to keep peace in the family. Dad cleared his throat, drawing our attention. I've been thinking about this whole experience, and I realize we all learned something important. Family isn't about who needs what the most. It's about recognizing everyone's contributions and making sure everyone feels valued. Even when that means having difficult conversations, Mom added. Especially when it means having difficult conversations, I corrected. As the call ended and we cleaned up from dinner, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed. I had gone from being the overlooked daughter who was too successful to need family support to being an equal partner in family decisions and the inheritor of a business I was genuinely excited to grow. But the most important change was internal. I'd learned to value myself enough to demand equal treatment, to recognize that my competence was an asset rather than a disqualification, and to understand that true family relationships required mutual respect rather than one-sided accommodation. The recordings that had revealed my family's true opinions of me had also revealed my own patterns of accepting less than I deserved. Breaking those patterns had been difficult, but it had led to relationships that were more honest, more balanced, and ultimately more loving than what we'd had before. Sometimes the most valuable inheritance isn't money or property. Sometimes it's the knowledge that you're worth fighting for, and the courage to insist that others recognize your worth too. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.